Beneath the earth, 30 feet deep, surrounded by crushed steel and broken memories, investigators unearthed something that had vanished from time. A rusted yellow school bus, sealed in mud, frozen in place like a time capsule no one had buried. Inside, shredded seat fabric, broken zippers, a scattering of colored pencils and waterlogged notebooks still marked with childish handwriting. But no bones, no blood, just silence. 12 children had vanished during a class trip in 1989. No warning, no witnesses, no goodbyes. For 34 years, the town of Graybridge lived with an open wound. Families left in limbo, whispers traded behind closed doors, rumors replacing facts. The case faded, the names faded. Even the museum where it happened was eventually demolished. But now, with the bus recovered from the sinkhole, intact and eerily untouched, everything old is rising again. And the story, which once seemed buried for good, is forcing its way back to the surface. Because to understand what happened inside that bus, you have to go back to the day it left, back to the quiet, ordinary town it came from, to a place that didn't know it was about to lose everything. Graybridge wasn't famous, it wasn't dangerous, it wasn't even on most maps. Just a quiet Pennsylvania town tucked between pine woods and sleepy hills, the kind of place people drove through on their way to somewhere louder. It had one diner, 2 churches, and 3 stoplights that always blinked yellow after dark. But to the people who lived there, Graybridge was everything. It was safe, predictable, ordinary in the best possible way. And in March of 1989, it was preparing for spring. Children biked along the curved roads, their tires throwing slush from melting snow. Mothers swapped recipes on porches, while fathers repaired rusted fences. At night, the faint sounds of the local radio station drifted from open windows. Soft country tunes and weather forecasts no one paid attention to. Nothing ever happened in Graybridge. That was its charm. That was its promise. In classrooms, teachers rehearsed field trip instructions. In kitchens, 12 families packed lunches in brown paper bags, peanut butter sandwiches, juice boxes, notes scribbled with "Be good, have fun." And outside the local elementary school, an aging yellow school bus waited with a soft wheeze in its engine, bus number 73, scheduled to depart for the Graybridge Natural History Museum at exactly 9:15 a.m. The museum was a local treasure, small, dusty, and filled with donated relics, arrowheads, taxidermied birds, and a replica coal mine that children loved to crawl through. It was run by a retired archaeologist with bad hearing and too many stories. 12 students were selected for the annual museum enrichment trip, an honor for the curious, a chance to explore. Parents waved from sidewalks, teachers checked their clipboards. The driver gave a lazy thumbs up as the bus turned onto Route 19. No one knew it was the last time they'd see it. No one heard the soft voice from the back of the bus. A girl no one remembered putting on the list. A name no one recalled writing down. But in that moment, everything still felt normal. And in towns like Graybridge, normal is the most dangerous lie of all. Graybridge Middle School stood like a weathered monument at the end of Elm Street, 3 floors of cracked brick, fogged windows, and a fading playground that creaked even when the wind stood still. It was a relic, much like the town it served. The hallways smelled of floor wax and paper, and the intercom system crackled more than it spoke. But to the children of Graybridge, it was their universe. In room 207, 12 7th graders sat in mismatched desks, their fates unknowingly braided together by the upcoming field trip. The desks bore etchings of names, secrets, and quiet rebellions, remnants of those who had come before. The teacher, Mr. Lasky, always entered 5 minutes before the bell. He moved like a shadow, smooth and quiet, with a face that rarely betrayed emotion. Mr. Lasky had been at Graybridge for 8 years. No wife, no children, no pictures on his desk. His tie was always crooked in the same direction, and his briefcase bore scratches that told stories he never would. Some students said he lived in the old rectory house by the woods. Others claimed he never left the school at all. What was true and what wasn't, no one knew. He taught history with a softness, like he was protecting the past from further harm. Among the 12 were familiar archetypes, but none of them were simple. Evan Clay, the quiet boy with deep eyes and bruises he never explained. Maria Santos, who smiled often but startled easily. David Chen, sharp-minded but withdrawn, carrying a watch he checked every few minutes, as though afraid of time itself. Each child wore a mask, some carefully sculpted by survival. Ricky Malone joked too much. It was how he covered the nights he didn't sleep. Lena Park kept her drawings hidden, as if they were dangerous. Jeremy Wells, always picked last for everything, had a journal he never let go of. There was Ivy, Brianna, Malik, Ashley, Toby, and Paige. Each name would eventually hang heavy in the mouths of their parents, remembered in memorials and courtroom documents. But on that day, they were just kids, children on the cusp of adolescence, some hoping for attention, others desperate to disappear. They weren't friends, not really, but they were a class, and that meant something in Graybridge. In silence, they filled out permission slips, packed sack lunches, and waited for the yellow bus that would never bring them back. Mr. Lasky watched them from his desk, his hands folded, eyes distant. Something in his expression flickered that morning, like a memory rising too fast, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The day before the trip, room 207 buzzed with an energy that Graybridge rarely saw, the kind of electricity that only children could generate, pure, chaotic, and too large for the room to hold. The air was thick with chatter and questions. Will there be dinosaurs? Do they have real swords? What if we get lost? Mr. Lasky didn't answer most of them. He simply handed out the final set of permission slips and reminded everyone to pack a lunch and wear comfortable shoes. Parents were informed weeks in advance, but in Graybridge, things didn't always go as planned. Brianna's mom forgot to sign the form until the morning of. Ricky's lunch bag ripped on the way in. Lena almost didn't come at all. Her father, who rarely looked up from his drink, hadn't remembered the trip. It wasn't until her neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, intervened that a signed slip was delivered to the school just minutes before departure. David checked his watch constantly, his fingers curled around the strap like a lifeline. Evan sat alone near the window, tracing a path on the glass with his finger. Ivy braided her hair tight and then looser again, over and over. Mr. Lasky moved among them with quiet purpose, checking lists, ticking off names, but his eyes kept drifting to the hallway, as if something waited just beyond it. The bus arrived early. A 1984 Bluebird, paint flaking at the edges, its engine wheezing like a tired animal. The driver, Mr. Buckley, was known around town, stoic, dependable, and fond of sour coffee. He wore his uniform like armor. No one knew he had been asked to drive the Graybridge field trip only because someone else had called in sick. One by one, the students filed out. Some waved back at the school, others didn't. A few teachers came to see them off. Mr. Riggs gave Ricky a playful shove and told him to stay out of trouble. Jeremy clutched his journal tight to his chest. Maria stood near Paige, trying not to look nervous. The final child to board was Malik. He came sprinting down the sidewalk, shoes untied, shirt misbuttoned, yelling for them to wait. Mr. Lasky held the door open just long enough. No one laughed. They were all too busy watching the fog creep in from the edge of the woods. The bus doors folded shut. Mr. Buckley adjusted his mirror, and then, with a groan and a shudder, the vehicle pulled away from the curb and vanished down the two-lane highway. It would be the last time anyone in Graybridge saw those children. The Museum of American Myth and History stood at the edge of another nowhere town, an unfinished attraction surrounded by gravel, tall weeds, and fencing that still had "Construction in Progress" signs flapping in the wind. Once a colonial estate, parts of it had been restored for public tours, but most of the building still looked abandoned. The brochures called it "A Journey Through Forgotten History," but to the students, it looked more like a haunted mansion. The school bus pulled into the cracked parking lot just after 10 a.m. The sky above was heavy with gray clouds, and a cold wind pressed against the windows. Mr. Buckley parked without a word. Mr. Lasky slowly stood, clutching his clipboard. The children climbed down one by one, some yawning, some rubbing their arms as if the cold had crept into their bones. Nobody said it aloud, but the place didn't feel right. It was too quiet, too still. Inside, a woman named Vera greeted them at a makeshift reception desk. She wore a faded uniform, her name tag crooked, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Some parts are under renovation," she told them in a flat voice. "Stay with your group." She handed out laminated maps that looked newly printed, but strangely smudged, like someone had rushed the job. The museum's interior was darker than expected. Light bulbs buzzed overhead, and the walls felt too close. The main exhibits included things like colonial life, American legends, and a section downstairs simply labeled Underworld of Belief. Most of the security cameras on the ceilings blinked red, but a few hung limp, wires exposed. Investigators would later say the camera footage from that day was almost useless, grainy, glitchy, full of missing time. Jeremy studied the map with a nervous frown. Ivy stuck close to Maria. Ricky cracked a joke about ghosts and dead presidents, but even he didn't laugh. Mr. Lasky kept glancing behind him, as if sensing someone was following. They all stopped near a Revolutionary War exhibit, a dusty battlefield display filled with mannequins in cracked, faded uniforms. The air smelled old, damp, cold. While Mr. Lasky counted heads, Vera vanished quietly into a side hallway. Then the overhead lights flickered, and Paige pointed toward a hallway that wasn't shown on the map. It sloped downward, its entrance half covered by a blackout curtain. No one stopped her from stepping through first. At exactly 11:42 a.m., a visitor in the lobby glanced toward the west wing and saw a line of children disappearing into a hallway marked "Under Renovation, Staff Only." The sign was crooked, nailed to an old wooden frame, and partly covered in a plastic sheet. No alarms went off. No one stopped them. And that moment, fleeting, unnoticed, would become the last confirmed sighting of the 12 students. The hallway led to a closed section of the museum. Walls were bare drywall, the ceiling wires exposed, the floor uneven with dust and forgotten tools. Some say the group followed Paige, who seemed drawn to something. Others say Mr. Lasky guided them, perhaps by mistake, perhaps distracted. Either way, they walked in, quietly, in single file. And then, the door closed behind them. At 11:59 a.m., the fire alarm went off. A shrill, sudden sound filled the building. Lights flashed red. Visitors and staff rushed toward exits, confused but orderly. Vera, the front desk woman, was nowhere to be found. Some people recall a faint burning smell. Others mention hearing footsteps on the upper floors, though no one was assigned there. Evacuation lasted 9 minutes. By 12:08 p.m., the museum was cleared. Firefighters entered but found no fire, no smoke, no heat, just silence. The alarm had been triggered manually. Someone had pulled it from inside the under-renovation hallway, but no one could find the hallway anymore. And it wasn't until students started reuniting with parents at the school that someone realized 12 names were missing. The entire class from room 207, gone. Not outside, not in the museum, not anywhere. Just vanished. By 1:15 p.m., the museum was quiet again. Firefighters packed up. Staff slowly returned to their stations. It wasn't until the school principal called the museum that anyone realized the bus hadn't come back. Parents had already begun arriving at Graybridge Elementary. At first, they assumed the trip had been extended. A late lunch stop, traffic, a broken-down bus. But then the waiting turned into pacing, then phone calls, then panic. By 2:03 p.m., 3 parents were inside the principal's office. One of them, Lena's uncle, slammed a fist on the desk and demanded to know where the children were. No one had answers. The secretary's hands shook as she dialed the museum again. At 2:17 p.m., 2 local officers arrived at the Museum of American Myth and History. They were polite, confused, and skeptical. They expected a simple misunderstanding. A bus parked around the back. A teacher with a dead phone battery. Instead, they found nothing. The front desk had no record of the students leaving. The visitor logs were incomplete. Vera was gone. No one could even confirm her last name. The museum director, an older man with cataracts and a hearing aid, claimed he hadn't seen a school group all day. No children booked for June 12th, he insisted, but the teachers knew better. The signed papers, the permission slips, the schedule posted in the faculty lounge. When the police searched the grounds, they found no signs of struggle, no broken doors, no footprints outside. The security cameras had hours of missing footage. But the most disturbing discovery came at 3:34 p.m. The bus was gone. The 1984 Bluebird, which had dropped them off that morning, had vanished. No oil stains. No tire tracks, not a trace of where it went. And that's when the search turned serious. Graybridge wasn't just dealing with lost kids anymore. They were facing something that had erased 12 children, and their only way home. The first 72 hours passed in chaos. Search teams combed the museum from attic to basement. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead. Officers interviewed every staff member, every guest, every neighbor within a 10-mile radius. Flyers with the children's faces were taped on storefronts and nailed to telephone poles. The parents stopped sleeping, but there was nothing. Not a single shoe, not a backpack, not a fingerprint. It was as if the museum had swallowed the children whole. Local and state police brought in specialists. Divers scanned the nearby ponds. Drones were flown over the wooded outskirts. Every sewer, basement, and utility tunnel within 3 miles was searched. Even the museum's blueprints were pulled from dusty archives, revealing a strange fact. Some of the basement sections weren't on the plans. Hallways that shouldn't exist, doors that led to nowhere. On the 9th day, a geologist from the state's Emergency Soil Division was brought in. He'd heard rumors about the museum's unstable foundation and insisted on conducting a scan. The results showed minor irregularities beneath the western wing, air pockets, loose layers of limestone, signs of past shifting. "Could be a sinkhole," he said bluntly. But when they walked the area, ground-penetrating radar in hand, they found nothing. No visible collapse, no crater, just perfectly flat gravel and weeds. The museum director dismissed the theory entirely. "We'd have noticed if the building fell into a hole." So the sinkhole theory was shelved and quietly buried. But some of the parents didn't forget, especially David's mother, who began keeping clippings of every article she could find about sinkholes, land collapses, and vanishing structures. She wrote letters to professors. She filed her own reports. Because in her dreams she didn't hear her son screaming. She heard the sound of earth swallowing something whole. By the end of the second week, the story had escaped Graybridge. News vans lined the streets outside the school and museum. Microphones were shoved into grieving parents' faces. Headlines blared across TV screens and newspapers. 12 children vanish on field trip. No clues found. Did a sinkhole swallow a school bus? Cult? Cover-up? Something worse? Flyers covered every pole and bulletin board for miles. Faces of missing children smiling back from photocopied paper. Their names typed beneath like quiet pleas. Paige, Evan, Ivy, David, Brianna, Jeremy, Malik, one by one, 12 names, 12 pairs of eyes that haunted every room they were no longer in. The media storm hit hard. Talk shows dissected every detail. Former FBI agents offered theories on live panels. A psychic appeared on national television and claimed to see them underground, somewhere damp, somewhere dark. Ratings soared. Then came the theories. A local blog claimed there were satanic rituals once performed in the museum's basement. A YouTube video with eerie music connected the disappearance to other unsolved child vanishings from the 1960s. Another claimed the museum was built on a native burial ground. Reddit threads exploded with speculation. Secret tunnels, shadow governments, even time rifts. The parents were torn in two directions, hope and horror. Some clung to the cameras. They showed up for every press conference. They pleaded for information. Others retreated completely, refusing to speak, locking themselves inside dark rooms with the last photos of their children. But one thing was clear to everyone. This was no ordinary case, and no one, not police, not press, not the public, could explain how 12 children could vanish without leaving behind a single scream, a single footprint, or a single goodbye. Her name is Hannah Clay. In 1989, she was just 6 years old, too young to join the school trip, too young to understand why her big brother Evan never came home. Now, at 40, she sits in a dim studio, voice steady but eyes distant, as a documentary camera rolls. She's one of the few who remembers that day from the outside. "I remember his backpack," she says. "It was blue, with a rip near the zipper. He used to stuff gum wrappers inside when he thought no one was looking." Her voice cracks, but she doesn't stop. Evan Clay was 12. He was quiet, bright, and always reading something weird. Urban legends, ghosts, myths. He used to tell Hannah bedtime stories about museums that came alive at night. That museum trip? He couldn't stop talking about it. He packed his bag a week early. She remembers the waiting. Her mom sitting by the window long after the sun had set. Her dad walking outside, over and over, as if expecting Evan to appear at the end of the street. When police came, her mother collapsed without a sound, no screaming, just stillness. Hannah's life became a shadow of her brother's absence. Birthdays passed without candles. His room stayed untouched for 2 years. Eventually, she was old enough to enter it. She read his books, wore his old hoodie, traced her fingers over the desk where he'd carved tiny symbols into the wood. As an adult, she became a therapist, specializing in grief and unresolved trauma. But she admits, "I never healed. I just learned how to walk with the ache." She keeps one photo on her nightstand. Evan, sitting on the school steps, arms around her shoulders, neither of them smiling, just still, together. When asked why she's finally speaking now, after decades of silence, her answer is soft but firm. "Because I believe he's still out there. Not alive, maybe, but somewhere. And whatever swallowed him that day, I want the world to look it in the eye." After the chaos of the first 2 weeks, when the media frenzy cooled just enough for the investigation to breathe, the spotlight narrowed onto one man, Mr. Douglas Lasky. He was the last adult to see the children alive, the one who'd led them into the museum, the one who walked behind them into the hallway that no longer existed. And his story didn't hold up. Detectives brought him back in for a second round of questioning, this time under brighter lights and sharper tones. His answers had changed. At first, he said he followed the children into the under-renovation hallway. Now he wasn't sure if it was the west wing or the east. First, he claimed he tried to follow them. Then he admitted he froze. Then, he said he couldn't remember anything after the fire alarm. "I remember a buzzing sound," he whispered in the recording. "In my head, loud, like it was coming from the walls." When asked if he had contact with any unknown museum staff, he mentioned the front desk woman, Vera. But investigators had already confirmed Vera never worked there. Her name wasn't in any payroll records. No other employee recognized her description. No visitor log showed a Vera checking in. She was a ghost. That wasn't the only issue. Lasky's shoes, preserved in an evidence bag, had traces of concrete dust not found in the public sections of the museum. He also had a smudge of dried paint on his jacket, industrial blue, same as the paint used in the blocked-off basement renovations. Still, there was no physical evidence tying him to harm, no confession, no motive. But the parents had already made up their minds. Whispers began. He led them in on purpose. He was part of something. He knows where they are. He stopped going outside. He quit his job at the school. 3 months later, without warning, he emptied his apartment and vanished. No forwarding address. No family left to contact. No trace. Just a note taped to his bathroom mirror, written in faded ink. "I saw what I wasn't meant to see." By 1995, Graybridge was a town trying hard to forget. The posters had faded, weather-worn and sun-bleached. The museum stood boarded up, locked behind rusted gates and closed until further notice signs. No one bought the property. No one tore it down. It just sat there. A sealed tomb for 12 empty chairs. 12 names no one dared speak aloud anymore. At the school, room 207 was turned into a storage closet. Teachers no longer mentioned the field trip. New students were told nothing. The hallway where parents once waited, hearts racing, was now echoing and hollow. Time moved on, but grief stayed behind, sitting quietly in every corner. The parents unraveled. Some moved away, trying to outrun memory. Others clung tighter, sleeping with their child's clothes under their pillow, lighting candles every birthday. Marriages cracked under the weight of unanswered questions, some shattered completely. By 1997, 3 parents had taken their own lives. No one talked about that either. Mr. Lasky's apartment remained abandoned for 2 years before being cleared out by the county. His belongings were minimal. Books on ancient architecture, sketches of tunnels, fragments of notes that made no sense. One sentence was circled over and over again in the margin of a journal. "The earth remembers what the mind forgets." The town learned to walk past the pain, not through it. A child born in 2000 would never know what happened in 1989 unless someone whispered it. And by then, the whispers had turned to silence. But silence doesn't mean peace. It only means something is waiting. And deep underground, beneath the weeds and the gravel, something was waiting. In the summer of 1999, 10 years after the children vanished, a man named Billy Sanderson walked into the Graybridge Sheriff's Office and asked to speak to someone who remembers the museum. He was gaunt, sunburned, and smelled like engine oil. A faded cap shadowed his eyes, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He'd once been a janitor at the Museum of American Myth and History, briefly. Hired in late May of '89, fired just days after the disappearance. No one remembered him, but he remembered everything. "I was in the West Wing that day," he said. "They told me not to go near the maintenance tunnels. Said it was unstable. But I heard something. Kids' voices. Then a hum, like machinery, but deeper. What he claimed next was written down by a junior deputy, then quietly filed away. I saw the floor open, Billy said. Not like a trap door, like it pulled itself apart. The tiles folded down and vanished, like the ground was breathing. He swore he saw shadows fall in, then silence. They told me I imagined it, fired me 2 days later, no reason. No one believed him. He'd been fired for absenteeism and alcohol, according to museum records. His testimony didn't match any timeline. The wing he claimed to be in was sealed off to all staff during renovations. He gave no names, no evidence, no proof. Just trembling hands and a story that sounded like madness. But when asked why he was coming forward now, after all these years, his answer was quiet. Because I had the dream again. This time, I heard them calling my name. The statement never reached the press. It was labeled as a mental health concern and sealed in internal archives. The file remained untouched for over 2 decades, but deep down, in some cold, bureaucratic drawer, Billy's words still sit. The floor opened up, and the building swallowed them. The museum's western wing had always felt colder, dimmer. The ceilings hung lower, the walls damp with age. And tucked behind an unmarked hallway was an exhibit few people remembered entering, and none could find again. It was called The Subterranean Myths of Early America. According to archive brochures, the exhibit opened in late 1988 and was dedicated to ancient legends of underground civilizations, sinkhole gods, and creatures said to live beneath the soil. Myths from forgotten tribes, lost colonies, and Native American warnings translated into English centuries ago. But here's the strange part. The exhibit closed on the same day the 12 children vanished, not the day after, the same morning. Museum staff were instructed by internal memo to immediately seal and secure Wing C pending structural review. The public was never informed. No renovation permit was ever filed. No report followed. Within weeks, the entire exhibit disappeared from all brochures, floor maps, and public records. Some staff whispered about what they saw during cleanup. Strange carvings on the basement walls, child-sized handprints in the plaster, and bones, not human, but too large for rats, scattered near the drain grates. Others claim there was never an exhibit there to begin with. One former curator, speaking anonymously years later, described it differently. It wasn't an exhibit, she said. It was a doorway. Someone dressed it up with artifacts and plaques to keep people from asking questions. But the space was older than the building itself, older than the town. By the time investigators tried to enter the wing, it had been bricked shut, no doorway, no signage, just solid concrete where a hallway used to be. Some say it was to preserve safety. Others believe it was something darker. But the rumor still lingers in Graybridge like a shadow that refuses to lift, that somewhere beneath the museum, something ancient was disturbed. It was the summer of 2004 when a trio of amateur urban explorers entered the Graybridge Museum illegally. They had flashlights, a handheld camcorder, and local rumors to guide them. The museum had been sealed for 15 years, windows boarded, doors rusted shut. But a side entrance, warped from years of rainfall, gave just enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, everything was dust and silence. They wandered through decaying dioramas and collapsed ceilings, mice scattered underfoot. Exhibit signs lay tilted on the ground, their letters faded. The American Frontier, Colonial Legends, Children's Discovery Zone. But then, they found something that wasn't on the original blueprints. Behind a false wall in the children's exhibit, a crack in the plaster revealed a narrow stairwell. It led downward, deep beneath the floor, deeper than any official sub-basement was ever listed. They filmed everything, laughing nervously as the darkness swallowed them. At the bottom of the stairs they reached a door. No handle, no hinges, just a square of smooth metal set into the concrete wall. One of them touched it. The camcorder flickered, then black. When the footage resumed, only brief flashes remained. Jerky images. One explorer sobbing, another banging on the wall, screaming for the door to open again. A child's drawing, scrawled in something dark on a crumbling pillar. The faint sound of breathing, not theirs. They made it out alive, but they never spoke publicly again. The video was uploaded to an obscure web forum that same week, but within 48 hours the account was deleted. The footage became corrupted, permanently. Only stills survive, shared across conspiracy threads and deep web archives. One still frame remains the most chilling, a child's handprint on the metal door, and beside it, written in dust, "We're still down here." In the winter of 2009, Greybridge's abandoned museum was scheduled for full demolition. The site had been declared structurally unstable, but before the wrecking crews arrived, a team of city maintenance workers was sent in to inspect the lower plumbing. Old water lines that snaked beneath the museum's eastern wing. One worker, Marcus Hale, crawled behind a rusted boiler deep in the basement crawl space. That's where he saw it. A torn piece of leather wedged behind a pipe, curled and blackened at the edges like it had survived fire. It was a journal. Small. Child-sized. The cover nearly melted shut. But inside, there were pages. Burned around the margins, water-warped, but still legible. And what it said chilled Marcus to his core. Day 2. Mr. Lasky says we're lost, but I think we're just not supposed to go back. I hear something in the walls. It's breathing. Day 3. Emily says the dark doesn't feel empty anymore. I know what she means. I feel it too. Day 4. We found another staircase, but it went up and still didn't lead out. We're going in circles. Day 5. They stopped talking. I think it took them one by one. I pretend I'm asleep so it leaves me alone. One entry simply read, "If someone finds this, please tell my mom I tried to be brave." No name was written on the front or back cover, but on the very last page, in faint pencil, were 4 letters scratched into the paper. ECL, Evan Clay's initials. The journal was confiscated by city officials and locked in evidence storage. It was never mentioned in demolition reports. Never shared with the families. But Marcus Hale kept a photocopy. And sometimes, late at night, when he couldn't sleep, he'd reread that final line. The one etched so deep into the page it cut through. It knows we're still alive. It began with a storm. In late September 2023, Greybridge was hit by one of the heaviest downpours in a decade. Roads buckled, yards flooded, and just behind the old museum ruins, where the earth had long been cracked and unsettled, the ground gave way. A section of the rear lot collapsed into itself, forming a jagged, muddy crater nearly 15 feet deep. Construction crews, called in by the city to assess the damage, brought portable floodlights to the site. And that's when someone saw it, a glint of metal beneath the dirt, faded yellow paint, bent steel ribs, and a crushed roof caved inward like the frame had been swallowed and chewed. It was a vehicle. No, a school bus, rust-coated, half-buried, and sealed from the inside. The recovery took nearly 12 hours. Emergency responders cordoned off the site while investigators descended into the sinkhole. As the mud was cleared away, more details surfaced. The Greybridge Elementary logo on the side, cracked but visible. Bits of torn seat cushions, a child's shoe, a rusted chain that shouldn't have been there, wrapped tightly around the emergency exit handle from the outside. One paramedic said later she felt like she was standing at the mouth of a grave. And then they opened the front door. Inside, silence. No remains. No blood. Just dust, mildew, and darkness. But something else was there. Something the forensics team didn't release to the public until months later. Etched into the fogged glass of one side window, drawn by a child's hand, were two simple words: not dead. It took a full day and 3 cranes to lift the bus from the sinkhole. What emerged from the mud wasn't what anyone expected. The frame was twisted unnaturally, as if something underground had crushed it inward from all sides. The front axle was bent upward, the windows shattered from the inside, and the emergency exit had been welded shut with makeshift iron seams, sealed, not broken. Investigators stood in stunned silence as the vehicle was slowly set down on tarps. News helicopters hovered overhead, but officials kept the perimeter closed. No press, no public. Forensics began their search. They found no bodies, no bones, no blood. But the items inside told their own quiet horror. A pink backpack, molded and waterlogged, with faded initials, CM, a row of lunchboxes tucked neatly beneath the seats, still zipped. Several child-sized sneakers in a loose pile near the center aisle, as if taken off in a hurry or left behind in silence. A teacher's lanyard caught in the door hinge. But no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, no violence, only absence. Dust settled over everything. A strange pattern of scratches was discovered on the ceiling, thin, shallow lines running in spirals above each row of seats. When photographed under UV, they revealed an eerie image. Handprints, dozens of them, small, child-sized, all pointing upward. One print, pressed against the inside of the front window, had something smeared beneath it. Forensics confirmed it was not blood. It was charcoal, and scrawled in thick, frantic strokes beside the print, "We waited." The bus was declared a historical crime scene, and quietly, without press or ceremony, it was moved to a secured underground facility for further study. But that night, one of the transport drivers quit his job on the spot. When asked why, he whispered, "There were 13 seats torn open, not 12. The bus sat in silence inside a high-security forensic lab buried deeper than any museum ever was. Over the next several weeks, forensic teams combed through every fiber, every thread, every inch of metal. What they discovered confirmed what many feared, and deepened what no one could explain. Using modern techniques unavailable in 1989, experts lifted DNA samples from the seats, the windows, and even the ceiling of the crushed bus frame. 12 distinct child DNA profiles were recovered. Each one matched a student from the missing Graybridge class: Emily Cross, Devin Lang Sarah Moon, Brian Delaney. Every name on the original manifest, confirmed by biological traces found in dust, skin cells, hair fragments embedded in the torn fabric. But that was all. No fingerprints, no remains, no signs of decomposition or trauma, just presence. The children had been on that bus. Not recently. The traces were decades old. But at some point, all 12 were inside, breathing, moving, alive, and then gone. One forensic technician found something unusual beneath a bench: a single preserved tooth lodged between the metal slats. It hadn't decayed, just fossilized, like time had skipped the usual process of rot and collapse. The bus's air vents were filled with a black powder, at first mistaken for mold. But under analysis, it was found to be ash, not from fire, but from organic matter exposed to immense pressure without flame, like something had compressed the air itself into dust. In the end, the official report stated 12 child DNA samples confirmed, no biological remains recovered, cause of death undetermined, status presumed deceased. But off the record, one investigator said this: "There was something else in that bus. We don't know what, But it wasn't alone. And maybe it still isn't. The day after the discovery of the bus, the news broke nationwide. By morning, Graybridge was trending on every major outlet. Old photographs of the missing children, their grainy school portraits, smiling, frozen in 1989, were once again on every screen. Public pressure mounted. After 34 years, the case was reopened. The state formed a special task force, pulling agents from federal and local levels. But at the center of the investigation stood one woman, Detective Mira Shaw, a cold case expert known for her quiet persistence and her refusal to give up on the forgotten. What few knew, what she never told the press, was that she had been 7 years old in 1989. Her cousin, Lindsay Shaw, had been one of the 12 children on that field trip. Mira remembered the way Lindsay used to braid her hair with tiny plastic butterflies. She remembered the sleepovers, the way Lindsay used to hum while drawing animals. And she remembered the night the phone rang, the moment her mother screamed and dropped the receiver. She'd been chasing that silence ever since. Now she stood beside the unearthed wreck of the bus, staring into its hollow frame. Her hands were steady, her voice was low, but inside, something ancient stirred. Grief, rage, purpose. She requested full access to all original files, every sealed box, every misfiled report, every piece of evidence that had been packed away and forgotten in state archives. And she found them. Pages that didn't match, statements redacted for no reason, audio tapes labeled but never transcribed, a gap in the timeline no one could explain. But one detail hit her hardest. The bus wasn't supposed to go near the museum at all. It had been rerouted, and someone signed off on it. Her name hadn't appeared in news headlines in over 3 decades. Hannah Miles, the only surviving student from the 1989 Graybridge Museum field trip, had never spoken publicly. After the incident, her family moved out of state, changed schools, and shielded her from press and memory alike. For years she lived quietly, changed her last name, studied psychology, became a trauma counselor, dedicated her life to children who couldn't speak about what they'd been through, much like she never had. Until now. When the bus was found, she saw the news by accident, a silent clip playing above a diner counter. She hadn't heard those names in years, but the faces? She still saw them in dreams. The same night, she boarded a red-eye flight to Graybridge. It was the first time she'd set foot in the town since the day everything ended. She didn't go to her childhood home. She didn't reach out to old neighbors. Instead, she went directly to the investigation center and asked to speak to Detective Mira Shaw. Mira didn't recognize her at first. The woman before her looked composed, calm, until she sat down and whispered, "I was supposed to be the 13th. Hannah remembered things no child should. She'd been sick that morning, a stomach bug. Her teacher told her to stay behind, and the nurse called her mother. She went home, angry, embarrassed, disappointed. By the time she felt better, the news had broken. The museum trip, the disappearance, the silence. She never saw her friends again. But in therapy, over years, fragments came back. A story one classmate had whispered to her weeks before the trip. A hallway in the museum no one else seemed to find. A red door behind a velvet rope. And something else. A dream she had for years, the same every night, of 12 children walking into a hole in the ground and the earth quietly folding shut behind them. "I never told anyone," she said, "but I think I know where they went." The new investigation team brought in equipment the original search had never used. Most important, ground-penetrating radar. The museum grounds had shifted over time, storms, erosion, and the sinkhole collapse had fractured the soil. But beneath it all, something strange was revealed. A web of interconnected chambers and corridors, some nearly 30 feet underground. Detective Mira Shaw stood beside the radar operator as the images came into focus. Lines, unnatural angles, voids where solid earth should have been. Old blueprints confirmed only a single basement, but the radar told a different story. 6 chambers, connected by narrow maze-like tunnels, all sealed shut. One extended beneath the nearby church, another beneath the museum's west wing, where the children's discovery zone once stood. The team broke ground. In the 3rd chamber, they hit collapsed debris, rusted piping, old display cases, crushed stone, and something else. Bones. But not human. A forensic zoologist identified them on site. Twisted remains of small mammals, birds, possibly wolves. But something was wrong with them. The structure didn't match known anatomy. The curvature of the skulls, the length of the limbs. They were misshapen, mutated. One had human-like teeth embedded in its jaw. Another had 6 fingers. In a far corner of the chamber, an old museum plaque was buried beneath the rubble. It read, "Unearthed Creatures of Myth, an exhibit of folklore made flesh." None of the official museum documents listed it as a real exhibit. Mira felt her stomach knot. Who built this? And why? And what was kept down here that had never been meant to come back up? Detective Mira Shaw was reviewing faculty reports when she noticed a note buried deep in Mr. Lasky's personnel file. It referenced a small storage unit he had rented privately, paid for in cash, under a name variation, J. Laskin. The location was 3 towns over, never listed in the original investigation. She drove there alone. The unit was clean, almost too clean. No dust, no mold. A single shelf stood in the center, with 5 old cassette tapes stacked beside a worn-out tape recorder. Each was labeled by hand. 1. Class Prep 2. Audio log. February 1989-3. After, Visit 4. The Children 5. The Ritual. Mira listened in order. The first few tapes were simple, mundane musings, lesson plans, tired teacher ramblings. But by tape 3, his tone changed. Something happened inside that museum. I'm sure of it now. The children, they changed after the tour. Subtle things at first. Eye contact, voices in chorus. They began speaking together, finishing each other's sentences like one brain split 12 ways. Tape 4 was worse. They kept saying they found the real exhibit, one I didn't take them to. They said it was waiting for them. They told me I couldn't leave without seeing it too. Tape 5, the last one, had no label on the actual cassette. Only the case bore a title in red ink. The Ritual, Do Not Listen. Mira did. The audio was corrupted, filled with low static and ambient hums like breathing through walls. Then came the voice. Not Lasky's at first, but a child's whisper. It's under the glass. Break it. Let it speak. Then Lasky. I didn't want to lead them. I didn't want to do this. But something inside me said I already had. That it had always been me. The last line before the tape cut. I'm not the teacher anymore. They're not the students. We're all just pieces now. And the dark is hungry. After weeks of requests, the museum's original security archives were finally located. Long forgotten, stored on brittle magnetic reels buried in a county warehouse. Most of the footage had degraded. But one technician, obsessed with restoring lost media, volunteered to help. He ran the tapes through a reel-by-reel cleanup, stabilizing frames, recovering audio, and digitizing what he could. And on tape number 17, time paused. The footage showed the field trip group from March 2nd, 1989, time-stamped, grainy, but visible. 12 children and 1 adult. Laughing. Entering the west wing of the museum, just past the dinosaur exhibit. They walked toward a corner hallway that no longer exists. The wing was demolished years ago. The group pauses. Mr. Lasky raises a hand, as if explaining something off-screen. Then, a flicker. A few frames of static. A burst of distortion. When the footage clears, the hallway is empty. No children, no teacher, not even shadows. The timestamp hasn't jumped. No cut. Just disappearance, mid-frame. A digital scan confirmed the footage wasn't tampered with. A second camera down the hall, focused on the exit doors, shows nothing emerge, no one leaving, just dust swirling in place. Another angle, taken 20 seconds later, shows a janitor walking into the same hallway and stopping suddenly. He stares ahead, confused, then slowly steps backward without turning around. His broom drops. The tape ends. When investigators tracked down the janitor, now in his 70s, he refused to speak at first. But then, trembling, he whispered, "I heard them. Still in there. Calling names I don't remember anymore." And then he added one last thing. They weren't scared. That's what scared me most. They were digging beneath what had once been the West Wing, the same hall from the vanished footage, when the soil gave way. A collapsed floor section, long buried under years of concrete, revealed a hidden stone slab, and at the center of it, a symbol, carved deeply. Almost angry in the way the lines cut through the stone, intersecting circles, a vertical split down the middle, and 12 small notches surrounding the edges like compass points. Detective Mira Shaw stared at it for a long time, her flashlight beam trembling slightly in her hand. It wasn't decorative. It looked ritualistic, intentional. The archaeologist on site went pale when he saw it. He didn't speak, just reached for his bag, pulled out a notebook, and began flipping pages until he stopped on a sketch diagram. His hand hovered. It was identical. Mira asked where he got the image. He explained. It came from a folklore manuscript recovered from Mr. Lasky's old attic during the initial re-examination of his property. A journal, handwritten, bound in cracked leather, with the words, "The Door," beneath the names. The page with the symbol described it as the seal of mouthless return, an ancient visual used to bind what should not be named and to mark where time is no longer straight. Mira's pulse pounded. The journal listed the symbol's purpose as both an invitation and a trap, a map of sorts for where the unlearning begins. The last line under the diagram read, 12 points. One voice, no memory. All shall be kept in circles. That night, the excavation crew reported something else. Every compass on site, analog, digital, even GPS, stopped working when placed near the stone, and beneath the symbol, ground-penetrating sonar picked up what looked like another chamber, still sealed, still silent, waiting. It was found by accident. While clearing the wreckage of the museum's west sublevel, a worker knocked through a hollowed-out section of concrete. Inside was a rotting wooden box, wrapped in what looked like layers of melted tape and cloth. Inside it, a single VHS cassette, unlabeled. No date. Just a black strip of magnetic film that trembled in the light, as if reacting to the air. They played it using an old VHS deck from the university archives. A team of 5 sat in silence, watching. The footage began in darkness. Just sound. Ragged breathing, stone grinding. Then a flash of movement, a child's shoe, half buried in dirt. The camera shook wildly, as if dropped, then picked up again by a trembling hand. Then, the faces. 12 children, barely visible, caught in flickering light from what appeared to be a museum flashlight. Their expressions were not of panic. Not yet. More confusion. Disorientation. They weren't screaming. They were listening. Then came a tone. Not music, not speech. Just a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the screen. A few of the children looked up at once, in unison, like something was speaking to them from the ceiling. Then, all at once, screams. Not from the children, but from something off-screen, animalistic, metallic, echoing off stone in unnatural ways, as if there were no walls, only infinite tunnels. The camera spun violently. For a brief moment, the lens caught a wall, covered in chalk markings, spirals, and dozens of tiny handprints, and then black. But not tape in black, conscious black, as if something had covered the lens from the inside. Then one last sound, a child's voice whispering in reverse, repeating a phrase over and over until the tape burned out. The team reversed it, cleaned the audio. The whisper became a warning. We didn't follow him. We followed it. He was just the first to open the door. The screen cut, and the tape ejected itself. The town held a memorial that Sunday. The church was filled with people who hadn't seen each other in decades, gray hair where there had once been none, tremors in voices once firm. They sat in long wooden pews, staring at photographs of children who never grew old. 12 candles flickered at the altar. Parents took turns lighting each one. Some walked slowly, some clutched faded photos and shaking hands. One mother placed a tiny stuffed rabbit beside her candle, the same toy her daughter had carried on the day of the trip. There were no speeches. What could anyone say? The discovery of the bus, the bones, the tapes, none of it brought closure, only more shadows. Outside, a father stood by himself near the stone wall of the church. His name was Thomas Reed, and his son, David, had been the smallest of the 12. Thomas hadn't cried in years, not at the investigation, not at the finding of the bus, not even when he saw David's name etched on the memorial plaque. But now, beneath the cold gray sky, he cracked. Did they suffer? He whispered aloud, as if the sky might answer. Were they scared? Did they know we were looking? Detective Mira stood behind him, silent. She had no words, no promise to offer. She couldn't say they died peacefully. She couldn't even say they died at all. And that was the worst part. For these families, grief had never ended. It had only been paused, waiting underground, just like the truth. Now it was breathing again. One mother fainted during the final hymn. Another stood up in the middle of service and shouted, "You said it was an accident. You told us they just got lost." No one had an answer. Grief had come home, not as comfort, not as closure, but as a wound reopened. Detective Mira Shaw hadn't slept in 3 days. She sat alone in the incident room, lights dimmed, eyes fixed on the corkboard in front of her. It was covered in maps, newspaper clippings, faces of the 12 children, all connected with red thread, all pointing toward something that still refused to make sense. On her desk, the Lasky tapes, the VHS copy, forensic reports, sonar maps, and a hand-drawn sketch of the symbol carved beneath the soil. She whispered to herself, what if they didn't die right away? That thought had been eating her from the inside out. What if they'd lived for hours, days, weeks? What if the chamber was sealed not by nature, but by intent? Mira pulled up the pathology report again. The skeletal remains found near the bus had no trauma, no evidence of crushing, blunt force, or drowning. Just stillness, bones laid out in a near circle, as if they'd lain down, as if they'd waited. And then her hands began to shake. She looked at the symbol again. 12 marks, a circle, a central line down the middle like a door. What if it was all timed, designed? Mira stood too quickly. Papers fell. She gripped the desk to stop herself from collapsing. The audio from the final tape echoed in her ears. That reversed whisper. We didn't follow him. We followed it. She kept hearing their voices now. In the hallway. in the elevator, in her own car radio, flickers of static that sounded like children's breath. She covered her ears. Then, with trembling fingers, she opened her file drawer and pulled out her badge. She stared at it, then slowly set it on the desk. Her voice cracked in the dark. "I think I've seen enough." Hannah woke up with the tune still in her mouth. A soft, childish melody, one she hadn't heard in over 3 decades. Her voice cracked midway through it, as if her body remembered it better than her mind did. It was David's song, her younger brother, the one who vanished on that trip. He used to hum it during car rides, sitting in the back seat tapping it out on the window. She hadn't thought of that song in years. Not until now. The melody clung to her all day. She found herself drawing without realizing, circles, 12 dots, a line down the center of a napkin at the cafe. The waitress had to ask her twice for her order. At home, she opened an old chest from the attic. Inside, photos, school papers, and a faded field trip flyer. Explore history, find wonder, March 2nd, 1989. And behind that, a drawing. Crayon on thick, yellowed paper. 12 stick figures in a perfect ring, all holding hands. One figure in the center, larger, without a face. Below it, her own handwriting, age 7, just one sentence. "We all met it, but I forget its name." She dropped the page. Something inside her brain felt like it had shifted, like a door had creaked slightly open. She began having dreams, lucid, vivid. She was back inside the museum's lower halls, but they looked different. Stone walls, flickering lights, the hum of something beneath her feet. Children's shadows flitted past her peripheral vision. In one dream, David turned to her and whispered, "You left us there." She woke up sobbing, drenched in sweat. But the worst part? When she looked in the mirror that morning, she had drawn the symbol, perfectly, on her own shoulder, in her sleep. Hannah sat across from Dr. Ellery, a trauma specialist she'd been seeing ever since the dreams began again. The room was quiet, lined with books and soft lamps, but it didn't feel safe anymore. She had brought him an old cassette player. "I found it in my childhood box," she explained. "I thought it was David. I remember him singing to me on this. After the field trip, just one night. I was crying. He sang me back to sleep." She pressed play. The soft voice of a boy filled the room. A lullaby, slow and gentle, with the occasional breath between words. Dr. Ellery listened carefully, then paused the tape. "This is impossible, Hannah." He reached behind him and pulled out a patient intake file, one she'd filled out herself. "You told me David disappeared during that trip, March 2nd, 1989. She nodded, confused. "This cassette was manufactured in late March. The sticker under the tape housing proves it. See the factory batch? These models didn't even release until 2 weeks after he went missing." Silence. "So either the memory is false, or something recorded that after David was already gone." Hannah's throat went dry. She replayed the tape, now with a different awareness. At the end of the song, there was a whisper, almost buried under the hum of the tape. "You never stopped listening, Hannah. That's why I could come back." She dropped the recorder. It thudded against the carpet and hissed with static. Dr. Ellery leaned forward, unsure of what to say. Hannah's voice trembled. If he didn't record that, who or what did? And more importantly, did something return with his voice? The bus had been found in a sinkhole. That much was certain. But when geologists returned to map the surrounding terrain using ground-penetrating radar and 3D scans, they discovered something no one expected. There wasn't just one. Beneath the land that once held the museum's west wing, the soil was riddled with collapsed pockets, cavities that stretched deep into the earth, shaped like tunnels or chambers, some branching like roots beneath a rotted tree. In total, 12 anomalies, each roughly equidistant from the others, each directly aligned with a point on the stone symbol uncovered near the museum. The land itself seemed to reject explanation. The bedrock had shifted in ways that defied geological patterns. Some sections showed signs of pressure, inward pressure, as if something had pulled the soil down from beneath, not collapsed from above. Dr. Lana Chu, head of the scanning team, reviewed the data in silence. Then she whispered almost to herself, "These aren't sinkholes. They're impressions." As if something had once occupied those cavities, as if something large, symmetrical, and unnatural had been resting under the town. And then one by one, vanished. Mira stared at the satellite overlay. Each cavity was positioned in a precise radial formation. 12 points, one center. She looked again at the museum floor plan from 1989. The 12 children had vanished just above the spot now showing the deepest cavity. "We didn't lose them," Mira said quietly. "We mapped exactly where they were taken." Beneath her feet, in the bedrock of a town that no longer felt like her own, the ground wasn't just broken, it was hollow. Hannah had stopped speaking during the day. She barely ate, barely moved, but at night, her voice returned. Soft whispers, escaping her lips as she tossed in bed, her eyes fluttering beneath the surface of sleep. Her husband began recording the episodes. Each night, the same phrase. "Dolores, Dolores." We saw her. She was already waiting. The name meant nothing to him. But to Detective Mira Shaw, it cracked something open. She pulled old property ledgers, colonial archives, land registries from as far back as the 1600s. And then she found it. Dolores Vale, a 17-year-old girl accused of child luring and blood ritual in 1682, the same land that now held the ruins of the museum. Her trial had been short, her execution swifter. The townspeople claimed she spoke to children through stone walls, that she walked in places with no doors. They hanged her, buried her in unmarked ground, warned others to never speak her name again. But the whisper had returned, centuries later, through Hannah's sleep. Mira pulled the journal from Mr. Lasky's attic again. On the back cover, under a flap of dried leather, she found a folded scrap of parchment. On it, the same 12-circle symbol, and a handwritten phrase, "Her name cannot die if it is remembered in the dark." Suddenly, all the patterns made sense. The 12 vanishings, the circle beneath the soil, the final whisper on the VHS tape. Dolores was never gone. She had only been waiting, in voices, in earth, in dreams. And now that her name had been spoken aloud again, she was waking up. Archibald Vance wasn't just a historian. He was a collector of beliefs, fascinated by the rituals that early settlers tried to erase from public memory. His personal journals, uncovered in a sealed drawer beneath the museum's original cornerstone, told a different story than the clean plaque that once hung by the entrance. He had once written, "They burned the witches, but not the roots. Some spirits cannot be buried, only fed." Vance had traveled through the Appalachian backwoods and forgotten Pennsylvania mining towns, gathering relics tied to early colonial occultism. He referred to it as the obscure doctrine. Symbols, chants, preserved bones, even soil samples from places where the earth had groaned. His obsession had a focal point, Dolores Vale. In multiple entries, he described finding an old woman in Vermont who claimed to be the 7th-generation descendant of a girl taken by the mountain. That girl, she insisted, was Dolores. And she had been chosen, not accused. The woman gave him a scrap of cloth etched in blood, with the 12-circle mark in the center. Vance believed the land beneath the museum held something older than history. something colonial law tried to suppress, and which he wanted to reawaken through memory, soil, and presence. He built the museum on that exact land. When Mira turned over the final page of his journal, she found a faded blueprint of the museum's foundation. At its center, buried below the public exhibits, was a chamber labeled in Latin, Vena Dormiente, the sleeping vein. And beneath that, one handwritten line, scrawled in urgency, "If they gather, do not let them sing." The mural had been sealed behind drywall in 1990. No one even knew it existed until a structural inspection, part of the museum's planned demolition, revealed faded paint beneath the crumbling surface of the Colonial Life exhibit. A silent, forgotten wall. When workers removed the paneling, they stepped back in stunned silence. It was a mural, nearly 8 feet across, painted in deep oils and unnerving tones. It showed 12 children, hand in hand, standing in a perfect circle. Their eyes were closed. Their feet hovered slightly above the ground. At the center stood a tall black figure, faceless, its arms outstretched, fingers too long touching the shoulders of the children on either side. Beneath it, the same 12-dot symbol. Detective Mira stood in front of it, unable to move. She read the date scratched into the bottom corner. Completed, October 1988, L. Rawson. That was 5 months before the field trip. The artist was long dead, passed in 1996 according to records. But Mira located his daughter, now living in a care home. When shown a photo of the mural, her hands trembled. "He used to dream about those children," she whispered. "He said they were already chosen, that they came to him at night." Mira asked why the painting was hidden. "He tried to hang it," the daughter said. "The museum refused, said it was too disturbing. So he painted it inside a wall, said it was where it belonged, said it would only be seen when they started to come back." Mira stepped closer to the mural. There were names faintly scratched beneath each child, worn, almost invisible. One of them, David Reed. The mural wasn't imagination. It was memory before the event. He was 84 now, half blind, trembling even in stillness. They found Billy Warren in a care facility on the outskirts of town. The former museum janitor had never spoken publicly about the 1989 incident. But after seeing the mural resurface on the news, he agreed to one interview. His voice was papery, but sharp in moments. "I always knew they'd come ask, eventually." Mira sat across from him with a recorder. She didn't push, just waited. Billy stared past her, not at her, like he was seeing something no one else could. "It was the night before the trip," he said. "March 1st. I was cleaning the floors. Heard footsteps that didn't belong. Light shoes. The kind museum folks don't wear." He paused, shook his head. Lasky wasn't supposed to be there, but he came in, through the south side, had a bag with him, and candles. 12, I think. I saw him go down the sub-level steps. Mira leaned forward. "You followed him?" "No, ma'am," Billy whispered. "I watched from the service hall. I saw him unlock the floor tile in the mechanical room. I didn't know it opened, thought it was just decorative stonework, but he climbed down into something under the museum." A long silence followed. "What was it?" Mira asked gently. Billy's mouth twitched. "It wasn't part of the building, miss. That thing was older. Dirt steps, cold air, and singing. Real low, real wrong." Mira looked at the recorder. The tape clicked once. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked. Billy's voice cracked. "Because when he came back up, he wasn't alone." He closed his eyes then, started to hum, a soft, broken version of the same lullaby David once sang, and whispered, "He let her out. That's what I saw. He let her out." The official report was released quietly without a press conference. It offered no solid conclusion, No cause of the sinkhole collapse, no remains, no conclusive proof of foul play, no explanation for the bus's pristine condition, just 12 names etched into the final page. A list of the missing. For the families, it was a gut punch wrapped in paperwork. Mrs. Reed, David's mother, stared at the report for hours without saying a word. At the bottom was a line that broke something inside her. Due to the condition of the vehicle, no biological remains were recovered. For 34 years they had waited for bones, for fabric, for any human trace. Instead, they got rust, glass, and an empty aisle of untouched seats. The families were offered counseling. Some declined. Some moved away. Others clung harder to the ghost stories they once laughed off. At a town hall vigil, the mayor read their names aloud, one by one. When she paused at David Reed's name, someone in the crowd swore they heard a soft humming, that same lullaby carried on the wind. But no one said anything. And so the town buried the case, not with answers, but with silence. Detective Mira Shaw filed her final note on the investigation. One sentence. Sometimes the story doesn't want to be solved, only remembered. She closed the file, turned off the lamp, and behind her, deep underground, something shifted again. It arrived without a return address, no postage, no signature. A worn manila envelope, hand-delivered to the front desk of the Riverfield Herald. The receptionist assumed it was a late FOIA submission. She tossed it onto journalist Aidan Clark's cluttered desk. He almost didn't open it, but something about the handwriting, childish, uneven, made him stop. Inside was a folded piece of construction paper, a child's drawing done in heavy crayon. 12 children, stick figures, all holding hands in a circle, just like the mural. In the middle, a jagged shape, clearly meant to be the museum. Each child had a name scrawled below. David, Lena, Josh, Kara, all matched the records, but there was one more, a 13th figure, drawn in red, standing slightly outside the circle, arms extended, mouth open. The name underneath was blurred by smudged wax, but still legible, Elise. There had never been an Elise listed among the students, staff, or volunteers. Aidan turned the paper over. On the back was a faint date, March 2nd, 1989, and in small, shakily written pencil. She wasn't part of the class. She made the circle. The drawing began to feel colder in his hands. He looked at the envelope again. Something was still inside, a single crayon, red, worn to the nub. He turned on his tape recorder and whispered aloud, "Who was Elise?" From somewhere deep in the paper, a faint impression shimmered in the light, like something had been drawn beneath the drawing, then erased. 12 names scratched out, and one circled. Elise. Time didn't heal in Riverfield. It simply dulled the edges of a grief too large to hold. 34 years later, the houses of the missing students still carried their absence like a scent in the walls. In bedrooms left untouched, calendars remained frozen in 1989. Some mothers never moved away. They said it would feel like abandoning them all over again. David Reed's childhood friend, Jesse, now in his 40s, still walked past the old museum grounds every day. He never looked directly at the fenced ruins, but he always slowed down near the spot where the bus was found. He once told a local pastor, "If I ever hear his voice again, even once, I'll know I'm not crazy." Marriages had broken under the weight of unanswered questions. Some fathers became silent shells. Some mothers turned their grief into obsessive research, tracking down every rumor, every blurry photo, every anonymous letter. A few even believed their children were still alive, taken, not gone. Support groups came and went. At their last meeting, only 5 families remained. And yet every year on March 3rd, They still place candles at the memorial stones outside what used to be the museum lawn. 12 stones, no dates of death, just names. And one extra candle, always lit by an unknown hand, placed slightly apart from the others. Nobody ever claimed it. When asked about it, one mother said quietly, "Maybe someone survived. Maybe someone remembers. And maybe," she didn't say aloud, "someone is still watching." The envelope had yellowed with age. Postmarked April 1990. A full year after the students vanished, but never opened until now. It had been sitting in a forgotten archive box at the town's Department of Records, misfiled under property complaints. A clerk found it while digitizing files. There was no sender listed, just an uneven scrawl, "To whom it may concern." Inside was a single sheet of paper. No date, no signature. Just one sentence, written in jagged blue ink. "I kept them safe, for as long as I could." Detective Mira read it in silence, then read it again. The envelope had no fingerprints, no identifying marks, but she recognized the handwriting. It matched an old employee file from the museum's early years, Gerald Lasky. He'd vanished the same week the students did, presumed to have died in the same collapse. His name never made it onto the town memorial, and his personnel records had been quietly marked inactive. No body, no farewell, no mention. Just this letter, surfacing 1 year after the event, mailed from a town 3 states away. Mira traced the postmark to a small post office in Vermont. The clerk who'd stamped it was long retired, but old logs showed only 2 pieces of mail were sent that day, both handwritten, both paid in cash. The second envelope was addressed to someone named Elise V. No address, no surname, just Elise. Mira closed her laptop. Somehow, Lasky had survived the collapse. And if he had, did that mean the children had too? Or worse, had he been the one to keep them hidden? And what did he mean by safe? And from what? The documentary never aired on national television. It was uploaded to a small YouTube channel run by Aidan Clark, the journalist who found the drawing. The views were modest at first, but something about the video pulled people in. It wasn't the story. It was the silence. No narration. Just slow panning shots of the underground sinkhole, the mural, the 12 stones. Footage of Hannah in her quiet hospital room, whispering things in her sleep that no one could translate. Old VHS clips from the museum's field trip archive, grainy and flickering. Then, right at the end, one clip. A handheld shot of Hannah at 6 years old, standing at the edge of the museum's north hallway. She turns to look at the camera. She looks confused. She whispers something. The sound is muffled, but subtitles appear on the screen, transcribed from the original tape. They're still here. And then, black screen. No credits, no music, no answers. Just a final frame. In memory of the 12. And the ones we forgot to count. The comments section filled quickly. Viewers paused the video at the hallway moment. They swore there was someone else behind her, just barely visible in the shadows. Others began uploading their own stories about dreams, names they'd never heard before, but now remembered clearly. And one user, anonymous, posted a single sentence under the video. "Elise says thank you." A year after the bus was pulled from the earth, the museum ruins were paved over. An apartment complex now stands there, modern, quiet, sterile. Unit 4B sits directly above where the mural once was. A young couple moved in last spring with their daughter Lily. She just turned 7. Last night, she started sleep-talking. Her mother stood by the door, confused, phone in hand. Lily's voice was faint, repeating the same sentence over and over in a whisper. "We need one more. We need one more. We need one more." Her mother gently woke her. Lily opened her eyes and asked, "Mommy, who was Elise?" Her mother blinked. She didn't know that name. Later that night, Lily began to draw. 12 children, a 13th figure, standing just outside the circle, the same crayon red shape from the old drawing. Only now, the face had detail. It looked like Lily. She held up the picture to her mom and said, "They said I can come next time." That night, Lily stood by the window. The lights flickered once. And down below, where the foundation once opened to the underground stone chamber, a shape in the earth pulsed, briefly, as if breathing. Something old was still watching. And somewhere, in the cracks of memory and history, one more was being chosen.